The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wasco, Texas, as Flora Malone's trembling hands cradled the smoking revolver. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, defending herself from a drunken ranch hand who'd cornered her in her father's barn. Now, as the man lay groaning on the ground, clutching his wounded shoulder, Flora knew her life in this town was over. Her father's thunderous footsteps approaching the barn doors confirmed what she already feared. Joseph Malone's face contorted with rage as he surveyed the scene, his 20-year-old daughter standing over a bleeding man, his prized worker incapacitated because of her. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice carrying across the property. "Robert is my best ranch hand." He tried to, Flora's voice caught. "He cornered me, father. He wouldn't take no for an answer." Joseph's gaze flickered between his daughter and Robert, who was now sitting up, nursing his shoulder and muttering curses. "She's lying," Robert spat. "The girl's been making eyes at me for weeks. Then shoots me when I take her up on her invitation." Flora's heart plummeted as she watched her father's expression. She knew that look he believed Robert over his own daughter. The betrayal stung worse than any physical blow. First your mother abandons us, and now this. Joseph's voice grew cold. "You're a disgrace to the Malone name." The words cut deep into Flora's heart. She'd spent years trying to earn her father's approval after her mother had left them both when Flora was just 12. She'd run the household, learned to cook and clean, and even helped with the ranch accounts. But nothing she did was ever enough. "Pack your things," Joseph commanded. "I want you gone by sunrise." "Father, please," Flora pleaded. "Where will I go? That's no concern of mine. I'll not have a disgrace under my roof." Flora stood frozen as her father helped Robert to his feet and led him out of the barn, leaving her alone with the revolver still warm in her palm. The year was 1875, and a woman alone in the West faced few prospects beyond marriage or worse. Dawn broke over the eastern plains as Flora mounted her mare, Willow. She'd packed what little she could carry, a change of clothes, her mother's locket, and the small stash of money she'd saved from selling her embroidery in town. The weight of her father's shotgun pressed against her back, hidden beneath her cloak. She wouldn't leave unarmed. She rode away from the only home she'd ever known without looking back. Wasco might have been a small town, but it was large enough that word of what happened wouldn't spread immediately. She had time to reach the next settlement before her reputation caught up with her. 3 days of hard riding brought Flora to the outskirts of Thornridge, a growing cattle town 30 miles southwest of Wasco. Her provisions were dwindling, and Willow needed rest. As she approached the town's main street, the midday sun beat down mercilessly on her dust-covered clothes and weary frame. The bustle of Thornridge was a stark contrast to the quiet isolation she'd endured for days. Cowboys sauntered between saloons, merchants called out their wares, and women in fine dresses navigated the busy thoroughfare with parasols tilted against the sun. Flora felt conspicuously out of place with her travel-worn appearance. She tethered Willow to a post outside the general store and stepped inside, hoping to inquire about lodgings and perhaps work. The bell above the door announced her arrival, drawing the attention of the shopkeeper and a tall figure at the counter. "Good day, miss," the shopkeeper greeted her. "What can I help you with?" Before she could respond, a commotion erupted outside, shouts and the thunder of hooves. Flora's blood ran cold as she recognized one of the voices. Her father's ranch hands had found her sooner than expected. The tall man at the counter turned, giving Flora her first clear view of him. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a weathered face that had seen its share of sun and hardship. His eyes, a startling shade of green, assessed her with unexpected sharpness. "You look like you're in trouble," he stated rather than asked. Flora hesitated. Trust didn't come easily, especially now. "I can handle my affairs." The man's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "I don't doubt that, madam, but those fellows outside sound mighty determined." The door burst open, and two of her father's men stormed in. The taller one, Silas, pointed an accusing finger at Flora. "There she is. Mr. Malone wants his daughter brought back to face charges for shooting Robert." The shopkeeper backed away, clearly wanting no part in the confrontation. Flora's hand inched toward her hidden pistol, but before she could reach it, the tall stranger stepped between her and the ranch hands. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel, "I believe you're mistaken. This lady is my wife." The declaration stunned everyone into silence, including Flora. She stared at the stranger's back, wondering what game he was playing. Silas recovered first. "That ain't true. She's Joseph Malone's daughter from Wasco, been missing 3 days now." The stranger shook his head. "I'm afraid you've got the wrong woman. This is Mrs. Flora Nicholson, my wife of 2 weeks. We've been traveling from Santa Fe." "Nicholson," Silas repeated skeptically. "And you are Quentin Nicholson," the man replied without hesitation, "ranch owner from the Cimarron Territory. Now, if you'll excuse us, my wife and I have purchases to make." Flora realized she needed to play along if she hoped to escape. "Darling," she said, stepping closer to the stranger and placing a hand on his arm, "perhaps we should continue our shopping elsewhere." Quentin covered her hand with his, the warmth of his palm surprisingly reassuring. "A fine idea, dear." Silas and his companion exchanged uncertain glances. "She looks mighty like the Malone girl," Silas insisted. "I've never been to Wasco," Flora lied, meeting Silas's gaze steadily. The second ranch hand tugged at Silas's sleeve. "Come on. Mr. Malone said she might head south. We should check the other towns." After another moment of suspicious scrutiny, Silas relented. "If I find out you're lying." He left the threat hanging as he backed toward the door. "Safe travels, gentlemen," Quentin said pleasantly, his hand still covering Flora's. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded did Flora exhale and step away from her supposed husband. "I don't know whether to thank you or question your motives, Mr. Nicholson." "Quentin will do," he replied. "And you're welcome, though I suspect there's more to this story than a disagreement with your father." Flora glanced at the shopkeeper, who was pretending not to eavesdrop. "Perhaps we could discuss this elsewhere," Quentin nodded. "My camp is just outside town." "You're welcome to join me for a meal while we sort this out." Under normal circumstances, Flora would never have considered following a strange man to his camp. But these were far from normal circumstances, and something in Quentin's direct gaze suggested trustworthiness or at least less danger than what pursued her. "Very well," she agreed, "but I'll keep my mare saddled." A smile creased the corners of Quentin's eyes. "I'd expect nothing less from a woman who's running from something or someone with a gun hidden under her cloak." Flora stiffened. "How did you? When you've lived as long as I have in these territories, you develop an eye for who's armed and who isn't." He tipped his hat to the shopkeeper. "I'll return tomorrow to complete my order, Harold." Outside, Flora untethered Willow and mounted smoothly, following Quentin as he led his own horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, away from the town's main street. "How do I know this isn't a trap?" she asked, riding alongside him once they'd cleared the town limits. Quentin glanced at her. "You don't. But I figure anyone who's got Joseph Malone's men hunting them might be worth helping." Flora's surprise must have shown on her face because Quentin continued. "Your father's reputation extends beyond Wasco. Not many men would call their own daughter a disgrace publicly enough for it to become gossip." Heat rushed to Flora's cheeks, part embarrassment, part anger. "You know my father." "Know of him," Quentin clarified. "Had the misfortune of selling him cattle 2 years back. Hardest negotiation of my life, and he still tried to claim the herd was underweight upon delivery." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of hooves on packed earth almost soothing. Quentin's camp came into view, a simple setup with a small tent, a fire pit, and supplies neatly arranged nearby. "It's not much," Quentin said as he dismounted, "but it serves its purpose." Flora stayed atop Willow, still wary. "Why are you camping outside town instead of taking a room?" Quentin unsaddled his horse before answering. "I prefer the open air, and rooms in Thornridge are overpriced. I'm here to buy supplies before heading back to my ranch." "In the Cimmerian territory," Flora recalled. "Is that true or just part of your charade?" "That part's true enough." He gestured to a fallen log near the unlit fire pit. "You can sit if you like. I promise I'm not in the habit of abducting young women." Something in his matter-of-fact tone eased Flora's suspicions. She dismounted but kept Willow's reins in hand as she took the offered seat. "Thank you for your intervention, regardless of your reasons." Quentin busied himself building a fire. "Would those men have hurt you if they'd taken you back?" Flora considered lying but found she didn't have the energy. "Not directly. But my father would have seen me jailed for defending myself against unwanted advances." "Ah," Quentin's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "The man you shot, he tried to force himself on you." Flora nodded, her throat tightening at the memory. "Robert was my father's favorite ranch hand. When I rejected his proposal 3 months ago, he became persistent. That night in the barn, he was drunk. Said if I wouldn't be his wife willingly, he'd make sure I had no choice." The fire caught, small flames licking at the dry kindling. Quentin's face was grim in the growing light. "You did what any person with sense would do. Your father should have protected you, not cast you out." "My father has always valued loyalty from his men above all else, even his own blood." The bitterness in her voice surprised even Flora. "Some men don't deserve to be fathers," Quentin said quietly, adding larger sticks to the fire. A companionable silence fell between them as the fire grew stronger. Flora finally released Willow's reins, allowing the mare to graze nearby. Her stomach rumbled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since morning. Quentin reached into his saddlebag and produced some jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water, offering them to Flora. "It's not a feast, but it's filling," she accepted gratefully. "Where exactly is your ranch?" "North of here, about a week's ride. 160 acres along the North Fork of the Canadian River." Pride colored his voice. "Started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle 6 years ago. Now I've got close to 300 head and 4 good hands working for me." As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the plains, Flora found herself relaxing in Quentin's presence. There was something steadying about him, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention. "What will you do now?" he asked after they'd eaten. "Those men will keep searching." Flora had been avoiding this question even in her own thoughts. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some money saved, but not enough to start over properly." "You have family elsewhere?" "None that would take me in." She stared into the fire. "My mother left when I was 12. No siblings." "My father made sure we were isolated, said it kept us focused on the ranch." Quentin considered this. "You have skills, something you could use to support yourself. I can keep accounts, run a household. I'm good with a needle, made extra money doing fine embroidery for the women in town." She gave a hollow laugh. "Not much call for that in places where I won't be recognized." The crackling fire filled the silence as Quentin seemed to deliberate something. Finally, he spoke. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Malone." "Flora," she corrected. "If we're to be married, you might as well use my given name." A smile touched his lips. "Flora, then. My proposition is this. Continue with our ruse. Travel with me to my ranch as Mrs. Nicholson. It's far enough from Wasco that your father's influence won't reach, and you'll have time to decide your next steps." Flora regarded him skeptically. "And what would you expect in return for this generosity?" My housekeeper left 2 months ago to care for her ailing sister. The place is in disarray, and I'm abysmal with domestic matters. You mentioned household skills. I'd compensate you fairly for putting things in order while you stay. As your pretend wife but actual housekeeper, Flora clarified. Precisely. Once we're at the ranch, the pretense can drop. My hands know better than to pry into my business. You'd have your own room, of course. It was a lifeline, perhaps not ideal, but better than any alternative Flora had contemplated. Still, caution held her back. How do I know I can trust you? Quentin's green eyes met hers steadily. You don't. Just as I don't know if I can trust that you've told me the whole truth. But sometimes, Miss Flora, life requires a leap of faith. As night descended fully upon the camp, Flora made her decision. I accept your proposition, Mr. Nicholson Quentin, but I'll keep my pistol close just the same. His laugh was unexpected and warm. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Now get some rest. We leave at first light. The journey north was arduous but not unpleasant. Flora found Quentin to be a considerate traveling companion respectful of her privacy, skilled at finding suitable camping spots, and surprisingly well-read. Their conversations ranged from literature to ranching techniques to the changing landscape as they traveled. By the third day, Flora had relaxed enough to share more of her story, how her father had grown bitter after her mother's departure, how he'd channeled that bitterness into building his ranch into one of the most prosperous in the county, all while keeping Flora isolated and under his thumb. He wanted a son, she explained as they rode side by side across a vast prairie dotted with wildflowers. Instead, he got me. Nothing I did was ever enough to make up for that disappointment. Quentin listened without judgment. Some men can't see the value of what's right in front of them. In turn, he shared pieces of his own history. Born in Pennsylvania, he'd come west after the war, seeking a fresh start after losing his older brother at Gettysburg. He'd worked as a cowhand, saved his wages, and eventually staked his claim in the territory. The land speaks to me in a way people rarely do, he admitted one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Out here, a man is measured by his actions, not his words. On the 6th day of their journey, they crested a hill to reveal a sweeping vista. In the valley below, nestled against the backdrop of rolling hills and a winding river, sat Quentin's ranch. The main house was modest but well-built, flanked by a large barn and several outbuildings. Fenced pastures stretched into the distance, dotted with cattle. "Welcome to the North Star Ranch," Quentin said, a note of pride in his voice. Flora took in the peaceful scene. "It's beautiful. It's home." He urged his horse forward. "Come on, we'll have a proper meal tonight." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, raising a hand in greeting. 2 others appeared from behind the house, curiosity evident in their stances. "My ranch hands," Quentin explained. "Good men, all of them. The one by the barn is Ellis, been with me since I started. The others are brothers, Tom and Samuel Harding." Flora straightened in her saddle, suddenly aware of her travel-worn appearance. She'd be meeting these men as Quentin's supposed wife, a fiction they'd maintained throughout their journey whenever they encountered others. Ellis approached as they reached the yard, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Boss, wasn't expecting you back so soon." His gaze shifted to Flora, curiosity evident. Quentin dismounted and helped Flora down from Willow before making introductions. "Ellis, this is Flora Nicholson, my wife. We were married in Santa Fe." Ellis's eyebrows shot up, but to his credit he recovered quickly. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat, "a pleasure and a surprise." Flora mustered a smile. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Ellis." The other hands approached, equally surprised by the news. Flora felt their assessing gazes and stood a little straighter, chin lifting in defiance of their unspoken questions. "Mrs. Nicholson is tired from our journey," Quentin said. his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "We'll get settled, and there will be time for proper introductions at supper." Inside, the house revealed the truth of Quentin's statement about his housekeeper. While structurally sound and well-built, the interior showed signs of bachelor neglect: dishes piled in the kitchen, dust on the surfaces, and a general air of disorganization. "I warned you," Quentin said, noting Flora's expression as she surveyed the main room. "You did," she agreed, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. "It's nothing that can't be set right." He showed her to a bedroom at the back of the house, clearly unused, with simple furnishings and a window overlooking a small kitchen garden gone wild with neglect. "This was meant for family eventually," Quentin explained, setting her bags on the bed. "Never had cause to use it before." Flora ran her hand over the quilt covering the bed. "It's perfect, thank you." A slightly awkward silence fell between them. Their easy companionship of the trail seemed suddenly complicated by the reality of their arrangement. "I should check on the cattle," Quentin said finally. "Take some time to settle in. Kitchen stores are yours to use, though I can't vouch for their state." After he left, Flora sat on the edge of the bed, the enormity of her situation washing over her. A week ago, she'd been the daughter of a prominent rancher. Now she was a fugitive, pretending to be married to a man she barely knew, about to play housekeeper on a ranch hundreds of miles from everything familiar. But as she looked around the simple, clean room, she felt something else too: a sense of possibility. Here, far from her father's shadow, perhaps she could discover who she truly was. Flora threw herself into bringing order to the house. By supper time, she had the kitchen functioning, a hearty stew simmering on the stove, and the main living area cleared of the worst clutter. She'd found a dress in her bags that, while simple, was clean and presentable enough to wear for meeting the ranch hands properly. The men filed in at Quentin's call, washing up at the pump outside before entering. Their obvious surprise at the transformed kitchen and the smell of home cooking brought a smile to Flora's face. "Madam," Tom, the younger of the Harding brothers, said with genuine appreciation, "this is the finest thing I've smelled since leaving my mother's table." "It's just a simple stew," Flora replied, pleased nonetheless. "There's cornbread as well." They ate around the large kitchen table, the men initially reserved but gradually warming as the meal progressed. Flora learned that Ellis had been a cavalry sergeant during the war. The Harding brothers hailed from Missouri, and all three clearly respected Quentin deeply. "Boss saved my life during a cattle drive 3 years back," Samuel explained between mouthfuls. "Flash flood caught us crossing a river. My horse went down and I was sure I'd follow. Next thing I know, the boss has me by the collar, dragging me to shore." "He didn't mention that," Flora said, glancing at Quentin, who looked uncomfortable with the praise. "Boss doesn't mention much about himself," Ellis said with a knowing smile. "Especially not the parts that make him look good." After the meal, as Flora served coffee, Ellis broached the subject they'd all been carefully avoiding. "So, boss, you never mentioned courting a lady, let alone getting married." Quentin's gaze met Flora's across the table. "Some things happen unexpectedly, Ellis." "Must have been some courtship," Samuel added with a grin. "Boss rides out for supplies, comes back with a wife." Flora set down the coffee pot. "Mr. Nicholson and I had a whirlwind romance. Sometimes you just know when you've met the right person." The ease with which the lie came to her lips was unsettling. Even more unsettling was the way Quentin's eyes lingered on hers, something unreadable in their green depths. "Well, we're mighty pleased to have a woman's touch around here again," Ellis declared, raising his cup in a toast. "To the new Mrs. Nicholson, may your days here be long and happy." The men echoed the sentiment, and Flora felt a pang of guilt. These good men were celebrating a marriage that didn't exist. Someday soon, they would discover the deception. After the hands departed for their quarters in the bunkhouse, Flora and Quentin were left alone with the remains of the meal and a silence heavy with unspoken thoughts. "You've worked wonders with the place already," Quentin said finally, helping her clear the dishes. "It gives me something to focus on." Flora scrubbed a plate with more vigor than necessary. "Though I'm not comfortable with lying to your men, they seem like good people." Quentin leaned against the counter beside her. "They are, and eventually we'll need to tell them the truth. But for now, this story keeps you safe. What happens when they learn I'm not really your wife? That I'm a woman on the run from her father and his men? They're loyal to me, not your father, and they're not men who judge someone for defending themselves." He took the wet plate from her hands and began drying it. "Besides, by then you'll have charmed them so thoroughly with your cooking that they wouldn't dare complain." His attempt at humor coaxed a small smile from Flora. "I suppose we'll cross that bridge when we come to it." Quentin's expression grew serious. "Flora, I meant what I said. You're safe here for as long as you need. No obligations beyond helping with the house. When you're ready to move on, I'll help you get established wherever you want to go." The kindness in his offer made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." He was quiet for a long moment, his hand stilling on the dish towel. "Let's just say I understand what it means to need a fresh start. Sometimes, a helping hand at the right moment makes all the difference." That night, lying in her new bed, Flora listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Crickets chirped outside her window, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. It was different from the sounds of her father's ranch, yet somehow comforting. She thought of Quentin in his room across the hall, this man who'd upended his life to help a stranger, who'd brought her hundreds of miles to safety with nothing but her word that she deserved it. There was more to his story than he'd shared, she was certain. But then again, there was more to hers as well. Days turned into weeks as Flora settled into life at the North Star Ranch. The rhythm of ranch life suited her early mornings preparing breakfast for the hands, days spent restoring order to the house and coaxing life back into the neglected garden, evenings cooking meals that increasingly featured fresh vegetables from her efforts. Quentin respected her space, treating her with a careful courtesy that sometimes felt more like distance. He worked from sunup to sundown alongside his men, returning to the house tired, but always taking time to inquire about her day and share news of the ranch's operations. The hands accepted her presence readily enough, though she occasionally caught Ellis watching her with thoughtful eyes when she and Quentin were together. The older man missed little, and Flora suspected he sensed the unusual nature of their arrangement. One evening, about a month after her arrival, Flora was hanging laundry when she overheard Ellis and Quentin talking near the corral. "She's not really your wife, is she, boss?" Ellis's voice carried clearly in the still evening air. Flora froze, the damp shirt in her hands forgotten. From her position behind the clothesline, she could see Quentin stiffen. "What makes you say that?" His voice was carefully neutral. Ellis snorted. "Been married 30 years before my Sarah passed. Know what a married couple looks like. You and the lady, you're respectful, even friendly, but you don't look at each other like husband and wife." Quentin was quiet for a long moment. "She needed help, Ellis. She's in trouble not of her making and needed somewhere safe. Figured it was something like that." Ellis nodded thoughtfully. "She running from the law?" "No, from her father. Man who'd rather believe his ranch hand than his own daughter when she defended herself from unwanted advances." Ellis's weathered face darkened. "That type of man, met a few in my time." He spit into the dirt. "Well, she's safe here. The boys and we won't say nothing." "I appreciate that. She's good for you, you know," Ellis added after a pause. "Wife or not, first time I've seen you smile regular like in years." Flora slipped away quietly, not wanting to hear Quentin's response. Her heart pounded as she retreated to the kitchen. Ellis knew and didn't seem to care. More surprising was his observation about Quentin smiling because of her. Had she affected him so? Certainly, she'd noticed changes in herself over the past month. The constant fear that had been her companion since leaving Wasco had receded. Here, working alongside Quentin, she felt valued in a way she never had with her father. And if she were honest with herself, she'd begun to look forward to their evening conversations, to the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed, to the quiet intelligence in his observations about books they both had read, to the respect with which he treated her opinions. That night at supper, Flora couldn't meet Ellis's knowing gaze, but when the meal was over and the hands had gone, she found the courage to broach the subject with Quentin. "I overheard you and Ellis talking earlier," she admitted as they sat on the porch, watching darkness settle over the land. Quentin didn't seem surprised. "I thought you might have. Ellis has sharp eyes. He won't tell the others." "No, Ellis is many things, but never a gossip. He understands the situation." Flora wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Does it bother you?" "Maintaining this pretense?" Quentin considered the question, his profile strong against the fading light. "No," he said finally. "Though I'm not much of an actor, clearly not convincing enough for Ellis." "You've been a perfect gentleman," Flora assured him. "More than I had any right to expect from a stranger." "We're hardly strangers now," Quentin observed. "After a month of shared meals and conversation, I'd like to think we're at least friends." Friends. The word felt simultaneously right and somehow insufficient. "Yes," Flora agreed softly. "Friends." A comfortable silence fell between them. In the distance, a whippoorwill called. "I've been thinking," Quentin said eventually, "about your situation. Your father's men were searching for you a month ago, but they'll have given up by now." Flora tensed. Was this his way of suggesting it was time for her to move on? "What I mean to say," he continued, "is that you needn't feel trapped here. If you wanted to establish yourself in town, perhaps open a dress shop or offer your embroidery services, I could help you get started." "Are you asking me to leave?" The possibility sent an unexpected pang through her chest. "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. You're welcome here as long as you wish to stay. I just don't want you to feel obligated or confined." Relief flooded her. "I don't feel confined, in fact." Flora hesitated, surprised by the realization forming in her mind. "I feel freer here than I ever did at my father's ranch. There, I was always trying to meet impossible expectations. Here, I'm just myself." Quentin's expression softened in the gathering darkness. "I'm glad of that, Flora. Everyone deserves a place where they can be themselves." The following day brought unexpected visitors to the North Star. Flora was up to her elbows in bread dough when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Wiping her hands, she moved to the window and saw two riders, a man and a woman, coming up the drive. Quentin emerged from the barn to greet them, his stance relaxing as he recognized the visitors. Flora heard the rumble of voices and laughter before Quentin turned toward the house, gesturing in invitation. Quickly, Flora smoothed her hair and checked her apron for flour. If these were friends of Quentin's, they would expect to meet his wife. The door opened, and Quentin ushered in the visitors, a handsome couple in their 30s, both dressed for riding but with a quality to their clothes that spoke of money. "Flora," Quentin called, "come meet some old friends. This is Daniel Shepherd and his wife, Rebecca. They own the largest ranch in the county, about 20 miles east." "Daniel, Rebecca, my wife, Flora." Flora approached with a smile, extending her hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you both." Rebecca Shepherd, a striking woman with intelligent eyes, took Flora's hand warmly. "When we heard Quentin had married, we could hardly believe it. He's been the territory's most confirmed bachelor for years." "She finally wore me down," Quentin said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Coffee. Flora just made a fresh pot. As they settled at the kitchen table, Flora served coffee and some freshly baked biscuits, feeling Rebecca's curious gaze follow her movements. "How did you two meet?" Rebecca asked once they were all seated. "Quentin rarely ventures far from the ranch." Flora glanced at Quentin, realizing they'd never fully established their false history. "We met in Santa Fe," she began, choosing the story they'd told his ranch hands. "I was working at my aunt's boarding house when Quentin stayed there on a cattle buying trip." "It was her biscuits that won me over," Quentin added, a hint of genuine humor in his voice as he raised one of the baked goods in question. "Never tasted better, even at the finest hotels." Daniel laughed. "Always the practical man, Quentin. Marry for biscuits, stay for love." The conversation turned to ranching matters, cattle prices, water rights, and the railroad's expansion plans. Flora was content to listen, noting how Quentin's usual reserve melted slightly in the company of these old friends. "You must join us for dinner next week," Rebecca said as they prepared to leave. "We're having a small gathering, just a few neighbors. It would be the perfect opportunity to introduce Flora to everyone." Flora felt Quentin's hesitation before he answered. "That's very kind. We'll have to see if we can arrange it with the ranch work." "Oh, you must come," Rebecca insisted. "Everyone is dying to meet the woman who captured Quentin Nicholson's heart. We were beginning to think it couldn't be done." After the shepherds departed, Flora confronted the issue directly. "We don't have to attend if you'd rather not. I understand it complicates our arrangement." Quentin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "It's not that. The shepherds are good people, and their gatherings are usually pleasant enough. But attending as a couple," he broke off, searching for words. "It deepens the deception," Flora finished for him, "and eventually they'll discover the truth." "Yes," he paced the kitchen, uncharacteristically agitated, "though that's not my primary concern. I worry about word spreading. If your father were to hear rumors of a Flora married to a rancher named Nicholson." The possibility hadn't occurred to her, and it sent a chill down her spine. "You're right. It's too risky." Quentin stopped pacing to look at her directly. "I'll make our excuses to Rebecca. She'll be disappointed, but will understand." Flora nodded, though she felt an unexpected twinge of regret. Part of her had been curious about this glimpse into Quentin's social circle, this other side of his life she hadn't yet seen. Later that evening, as Flora was preparing for bed, a knock came at her bedroom door. She opened it to find Quentin standing there, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been thinking about the shepherd's invitation," he said without preamble. "Perhaps we should attend after all." Flora blinked in surprise. "But you said—" "I know what I said," Quentin interrupted gently, "but I've been considering it further. Your father is looking for his unmarried daughter, not a rancher's wife. And Rebecca won't be satisfied until she meets you properly. She'll likely ride over here herself if we don't attend." "You're sure?" Quentin nodded. "Besides, you've been working hard. You deserve an evening of entertainment." Something in his expression made Flora suspect there was more to his change of heart than he was saying, but she didn't press. "Then I accept, though I'm afraid I don't have anything suitable to wear for a dinner party." "We'll ride into town tomorrow," Quentin decided. "Get you whatever you need." He hesitated before adding, "And perhaps we should practice." "Practice being married," he clarified, a slight flush coloring his cheekbones. "Ellis saw through us immediately. The shepherds and their guests will be more observant still." Flora suddenly understood his discomfort. Their careful distance from each other, separate rooms, minimal physical contact would seem strange to outside observers expecting a recently married couple. "You're right," she agreed, her own cheeks warming. "We should appear more comfortable with each other." Quentin cleared his throat. "Nothing improper, of course. Just small gestures, the kind married people share without thinking." Flora nodded, oddly breathless. Like holding hands occasionally, or perhaps you might put your arm around my waist when appropriate. Exactly. Quentin's gaze held hers for a moment longer than usual. Well, good night, Flora. Good night, Quentin. As she closed the door, Flora pressed a hand to her flushed cheek, wondering why the prospect of pretending to be more intimate with Quentin affected her so strongly. The town of Pinesdale lay about 10 miles from the ranch, a growing settlement with a main street boasting several shops, a hotel, a church, and 2 saloons. Flora found herself nervous as they approached, realizing this would be her first public appearance as Mrs. Nicholson. Quentin seemed to sense her anxiety. Most folks here know me by name, but not much else. I don't come to town often. And those who do know you, won't they find it odd that you suddenly have a wife? They'll be curious, certainly. He helped her down from Willow. But Westerners generally mind their own business. If anyone asks, we'll tell the Santa Fe story. True to Quentin's prediction, their arrival at the general store caused a ripple of interest but few direct questions. The shopkeeper, Mr. Davis, offered hearty congratulations when Quentin introduced Flora as his wife. "Never thought I'd see the day," Davis said with a grin. "But I'm mighty pleased for you, Mr. Nicholson. The ranch was no place for a man to live alone forever." Flora felt Quentin's hand settle at the small of her back as he guided her toward the fabric section. The casual touch, part of their agreed-upon practice, sent a surprising warmth through her. "What color would you prefer for your dress?" he asked, gesturing to the bolts of fabric. Flora ran her fingers over a deep blue silk. "This is lovely, but far too expensive for a simple dinner." "Price isn't a concern," Quentin countered. "Choose whatever you like." After some deliberation, Flora selected a rich emerald green fabric that reminded her of Quentin's eyes, though she kept that observation to herself. They added lace trim, buttons, and thread to their purchases, along with general supplies for the ranch. As they were concluding their transaction, the shop door opened, admitting a well-dressed woman who brightened at the sight of Quentin. "Mr. Nicholson, what a delightful surprise." Her gaze shifted to Flora with undisguised curiosity. "Mrs. Winters," Quentin greeted her with polite reserve. "Allow me to introduce my wife, Flora. Flora, this is Mrs. Winters, the banker's wife." Mrs. Winters's eyebrows rose dramatically. "Wife? My goodness, when did this happen? I had no idea you were even courting Mr. Nicholson." "We were married in Santa Fe last month," Flora supplied, stepping slightly closer to Quentin. "It was rather sudden." "How romantic," Mrs. Winters replied, though her tone suggested she found it more suspicious than romantic. "Well, Mrs. Nicholson, you must join our Ladies' Aid Society. We meet every Tuesday at the church. So many charitable works to be done in our growing community." "That's very kind," Flora said noncommittally. "I'm still settling in at the ranch, but perhaps in the future." Outside the store, Quentin let out a breath. "Mrs. Winters is Pinesdale's foremost gossip. By sundown, everyone within 20 miles will know I've taken a wife." "Is that a problem?" Flora asked, suddenly concerned. Quentin's expression softened. "Not at all. Just be prepared for more curiosity when we attend the shepherd's dinner." Their next stop was the dressmaker, where Flora was measured for alterations to ready-made undergarments while Quentin waited outside. The dressmaker, a Frenchwoman named Madame Perrine, promised to have Flora's new dress completed in 3 days. For the new Mrs. Nicholson, "I will work day and night," she declared dramatically. "Such a surprise to us all. Mr. Nicholson is most handsome. No, you are fortunate, madam." Flora murmured agreement, finding herself suddenly preoccupied with thoughts of Quentin waiting outside his tall frame leaning against the hitching post, his distinctive profile turned toward the street. Handsome, yes, though she'd never allowed herself to dwell on it. Their ride back to the ranch was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill overlooking North Star, Quentin broke the silence. "Thank you for today," he said unexpectedly, "for playing along so convincingly." Flora looked at him in surprise. "I should be thanking you." "For the fabric, the dress, everything. It's the least I can do, given the circumstances." He hesitated before adding, "I hope the dinner won't be too uncomfortable for you." "I'm looking forward to it, actually," Flora admitted. "It's been a long time since I attended a social gathering." "My father didn't approve of them, said they distracted from work." Quentin's expression darkened. "Your father seems to have disapproved of anything that might bring you joy." The observation, so simply stated, made Flora's throat tighten. "Yes," she said softly, "I believe he did." 3 days later, Madame Perrine's assistant delivered Flora's completed dress. It was even more beautiful than she'd imagined, the emerald silk, complemented by delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, the cut both modest and flattering to her figure. That evening, as Flora dressed for the shepherd's dinner, she felt an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation. She arranged her honey-brown hair in a simple but elegant style, securing it with the mother-of-pearl combs Quentin had unexpectedly included with her purchases. When she emerged from her room, she found Quentin waiting in the main room, dressed in a dark suit that transformed him from rancher to gentleman. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face made her cheeks warm. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." Flora smoothed her skirts nervously. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Nicholson." A smile touched his lips. "Shall we practice once more before we go?" Before she could respond, he stepped closer and gently took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both courtly and intimate. "My wife," he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Flora's heart stuttered in her chest. "My husband," she replied, the words feeling strangely right on her tongue. The Shepherd estate was impressive, a large main house with wide verandas, surrounded by well-kept grounds and outbuildings. As their wagon approached, Flora could see other vehicles already arrived, lanterns illuminating the front drive. "Remember," Quentin murmured as he helped her down, "we've been married just over a month. We met in Santa Fe. I was there buying cattle." Flora squeezed his hand reassuringly. "I remember our story." Rebecca Shepherd greeted them at the door with genuine warmth. "Quentin, Flora, I'm so delighted you could join us. Come in, come in. Everyone is eager to meet the new Mrs. Nicholson." The next 2 hours were a whirl of introductions and conversation. Flora met the doctor and his wife, the mayor of Pinesdale, several neighboring ranchers and their families, and the young schoolteacher who had recently arrived from Boston. Everyone received her with courtesy, though she noted the speculative glances exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. Throughout the evening, Quentin remained close, his hand often finding the small of her back or her elbow to guide her. Each touch, though part of their charade, sent a ripple of awareness through Flora. More surprising was how natural it felt to lean slightly against him during conversations, to share private smiles at some comment, to refer to our ranch when asked about North Star. During dinner, Flora found herself seated between Quentin and the mayor's son, a young man named Edward who seemed determined to monopolize her attention. "Mrs. Nicholson, you must tell us how you accomplished what so many local ladies failed to achieve," Edward said, his voice carrying enough to draw attention from nearby diners. "Quentin here has avoided matrimony so successfully for years that we'd begun to think him immune to feminine charms." Flora felt Quentin tense beside her. "Perhaps I simply hadn't met the right woman until Flora," he replied evenly. "Or perhaps Mrs. Nicholson possesses exceptional qualities that finally captured your interest." Edward persisted, his tone suggesting something less than respectful. Before Quentin could respond, Flora placed her hand over his on the table, a gesture visible to everyone nearby. "Mr. Nicholson is a discerning man," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I consider myself fortunate that he chose me as his companion in life." Quentin turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers in a gesture so intimate that Flora almost forgot to breathe. "The good fortune is entirely mine," he said, his voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver down her spine. Edward, effectively silenced, turned his attention to his plate. After dinner, the party moved to the large drawing room for music and conversation. Rebecca played the piano while her husband and several other gentlemen discussed business in one corner. Flora found herself drawn into conversation with the doctor's wife and the schoolteacher. "You must tell us everything," Mrs. Peterson, the doctor's wife, insisted. "A whirlwind romance in Santa Fe. It's like something from a novel." "There's really not much to tell," Flora demurred. "We met, discovered we shared many of the same values and interests, and decided not to wait." "But surely there must have been a courtship, Miss Bennet," the schoolteacher pressed. "Moonlight rides, poetry, a declaration of love." Flora felt a moment of panic. They hadn't rehearsed these details. Just as she was searching for a plausible response, she felt Quentin's approach. "I hope I'm not interrupting, ladies," he said, coming to stand beside Flora. "But I believe I promised my wife a turn around the gardens before we depart." Relief washed over Flora as she excused herself from the increasingly probing conversation. Outside, the night air was cool and sweet with the scent of Rebecca's roses. Lanterns had been hung along the garden paths, casting a golden glow over the flowers and shrubs. "Thank you for the rescue," Flora said once they were alone. "They were asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer." Quentin's smile was rueful. "I heard. Our courtship seems to be of great interest to everyone." They walked in companionable silence along the winding path, the sounds of the party fading behind them. Flora found herself acutely aware of Quentin beside her, his steady presence, the clean scent of his shaving soap, the way he unconsciously matched his pace to hers. "You handled Edward beautifully at dinner," Quentin said finally. "The man has always had more arrogance than sense." "He was being deliberately provocative," Flora observed. "Does he have some quarrel with you? His father wanted him to learn ranching." "I offered him work 2 years ago as a favor to the mayor. He lasted exactly 3 days before deciding manual labor was beneath him." Flora laughed softly. "That explains the animosity." They reached a small stone bench nestled in an arbor of climbing roses. By unspoken agreement they sat, the narrow seat requiring them to sit close, their shoulders touching. "Have you enjoyed the evening?" Quentin asked after a moment. "More than I expected to," Flora admitted. "Everyone has been welcoming, curious but kind." "They like you," Quentin said simply. "Rebecca told me so while you were speaking with Miss Bennet. She thinks I'm a fortunate man." The sincerity in his voice made Flora turn to look at him. In the lantern light, his features were softened, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Quentin," she began, suddenly uncertain what she wanted to say. Before she could continue, voices approached along the path, other guests taking advantage of the garden's beauty. The moment broken, Quentin stood and offered Flora his hand. "We should return," he said, though she thought she detected reluctance in his tone. "It's growing late, and we have an early morning tomorrow." The ride back to North Star was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. When they reached the ranch, Quentin helped Flora down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," he said formally, as if suddenly remembering their true relationship. "You played your role admirably." The word role jolted Flora back to reality. For hours, she had almost forgotten they were playing a part. Had it been the same for him? "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied, matching his formal tone. "Good night, Quentin." As she prepared for bed that night, Flora found herself replaying moments from the evening, the feel of Quentin's hand on hers at dinner, the way his eyes had softened when he looked at her in the garden, the subtle protectiveness in his posture when Edward had been rude. Had it all been performance? Or was there something genuine beneath the pretense? More troubling was her own reaction. The comfort she found in his presence, the flutter in her chest when he touched her, the disappointment she'd felt when he'd called their relationship a role. These were not the feelings of a woman merely playing a part. Sleep eluded her as she confronted an uncomfortable truth. She was developing real feelings for Quentin Nicholson. The days following the shepherd's dinner brought a subtle shift in Flora and Quentin's interactions. Their practiced gestures of affection, necessary only when others were present, began to appear in private moments, a touch on the arm while passing coffee at breakfast, standing closer than strictly necessary while discussing the garden, lingering glances across the dinner table. Neither acknowledged this change directly, as if speaking of it might break whatever fragile understanding was developing between them. A week after the dinner party, Flora was tending her now thriving garden when Ellis approached, hat in hand. "Mrs. Nicholson," he greeted her, the title carrying a hint of irony given their shared knowledge. "Got a letter for you. Came with the supply wagon from town." Flora straightened in surprise, wiping soil from her hands. "A letter for me. That's what it says." Ellis handed over an envelope addressed to Mrs. Flora Nicholson, North Star Ranch. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and Flora felt a twinge of unease as she accepted it. "Thank you, Ellis." Once alone, she opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the message brief but chilling. "I know who you are, Flora Malone. Your father still seeks you. Meet me at Pinesdale Hotel tomorrow at noon if you wish to avoid exposure." The letter was unsigned. Flora read it 3 times, her heart pounding in her chest. Someone had discovered her true identity, someone who could destroy the peaceful life she'd built at North Star with a few well-placed words. She debated telling Quentin immediately, but hesitated. He was away for the day, riding the north boundary with Samuel. By the time he returned, it would be evening, leaving little time to plan before the meeting. No, this was her problem to solve. She'd relied on Quentin's protection long enough. Whatever threat awaited at the Pinesdale Hotel, she would face it herself. The following morning, Flora rose early, dressed in her simplest riding clothes, and left a note saying she was going to town for supplies. She saddled Willow herself and set out before any of the hands were stirring. The ride to Pinesdale gave her time to prepare. Her father's shotgun was secured to her saddle, and her small pistol was hidden in the pocket of her riding skirt. She would not be taken by surprise again. The Pinesdale Hotel stood at the far end of the main street, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and peeling paint. Few people were about as Flora tethered Willow and climbed the steps, her heart hammering in her throat. The lobby was dim after the bright sunlight outside. A sleepy clerk glanced up as she entered. "Can I help you, madam?" "I'm meeting someone," Flora replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is there a private parlor available?" The clerk directed her to a small room off the main lobby. It was stuffy and smelled faintly of cigar smoke, but the window overlooked the street, providing some reassurance that she wasn't completely isolated. Flora positioned herself facing the door, her hand in her pocket resting on the pistol. Noon came and went. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Just as she was beginning to think the letter might have been some cruel joke, the door opened. The man who entered was entirely unfamiliar to her, middle-aged, with a neat beard and the careful dress of a businessman. He closed the door behind him and regarded Flora with calculating eyes. "Mrs. Nicholson," he said, the name dripping with sarcasm. "Or should I say Miss Malone?" "I appreciate your punctuality." Flora kept her hand on her weapon. "Who are you, and what do you want?" The man smiled thinly. "My name is Harmon. I represent certain interests in Wasco, specifically your father's interests." Cold fear gripped Flora's spine. "My father sent you, not directly." Let's say I recognized an opportunity when I saw Mrs. Nicholson's description circulating in social circles. Green eyes and honey brown hair aren't common combinations, especially not attached to a woman who appeared from nowhere just when Joseph Malone's daughter vanished. "What do you want?" Flora repeated, her voice harder. Harmon spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. "I'm a practical man, Miss Malone. Your father has offered a substantial reward for information leading to your return. However, I'm willing to consider alternatives." "You're blackmailing me," Flora stated flatly. Such an ugly word. Harmon's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I prefer to think of it as a business transaction. $500 and I forget I ever saw you. Your father never learns of your comfortable new life as Mrs. Nicholson." The sum was enormous, far more than Flora possessed or could hope to raise quickly. "I don't have that kind of money." "But your husband does," Harmon countered smoothly. "Quentin Nicholson is known to be a successful rancher. Surely he would pay to protect his arrangement with you." Anger flared in Flora's chest. "You know nothing about my relationship with Quentin." "I know it began under false pretenses," Harmon replied. "I know your father would be most interested to learn where you've been hiding and with whom. I know Robert Williams is still bearing the scar from where you shot him." At the mention of Robert, Flora's resolve hardened. "When do you want your answer?" "I'll give you 3 days." Harmon moved toward the door. "Return here at noon on Thursday with the money. If you fail to appear, I'll be on my way to Wasco with my information by nightfall." After he left, Flora remained seated for several minutes, trying to still her shaking hands. The threat was clear. Pay an impossible sum or face her father's retribution and potentially implicate Quentin in harboring her. The ride back to North Star passed in a blur of anxiety. How could she ask Quentin for such a sum? What would he think when he learned she'd met with this stranger alone, potentially endangering them both? And if she couldn't pay, would Harmon truly expose her? As she approached the ranch, she saw a figure on horseback riding hard toward her Quentin, his expression a mixture of relief and anger as he reined in beside her. "Where have you been?" he demanded without preamble. "Your note said supplies, but you weren't at any of the shops." "The hands and I have been searching for hours." Guilt washed over Flora. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to worry you. Worry doesn't begin to describe it." Quentin's voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. "When no one in town had seen you, I thought," he broke off, running a hand through his hair. "What happened, Flora? The truth, please." There on the dusty road, Flora told him everything: the letter, the meeting, Harmon's demands. Quentin listened in grim silence, his jaw tightening as she described the thinly veiled threats. "You should have told me immediately," he said when she finished. "Going alone was dangerous. This man could have been anyone, could have hurt you." "I know," Flora admitted. "But I didn't want to involve you further in my troubles. You've done enough already." Quentin's expression softened slightly. "Flora, your troubles became mine the moment I told those ranch hands you were my wife. We're in this together now." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to Flora's eyes. "He wants $500, Quentin. I can't possibly ask you for that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He urged his horse forward, indicating she should follow. "Come on. We need to get back to the ranch and plan our next steps." Back at North Star, they sequestered themselves in Quentin's study, a small room off the main living area that Flora had organized during her first weeks at the ranch. Maps of the territory covered one wall, while bookshelves lined another. A sturdy desk dominated the center of the room, its surface now spread with papers as Quentin calculated figures. "I can raise $400 in cash by tomorrow," he said finally. The rest will take time to gather without raising questions at the bank. Flora paced the small space. Even if we can pay him, what guarantee do we have that he won't simply return for more? Or tell my father anyway? None, Quentin admitted. Which is why payment isn't my preferred solution. Flora stopped pacing to look at him. What do you mean? I mean we need leverage of our own. Quentin's green eyes held a determined gleam. This Harmon presented himself as a businessman representing your father's interests. I want to know who he really is and what connection he actually has to Joseph Malone. You want to investigate him? Flora asked, surprised. I want to know who we're dealing with before Thursday. Quentin rose from his desk. I'm riding to town in the morning. Ellis will stay with you here, and before you object, it's not negotiable. You're not to be alone until this matter is resolved. His tone brooked no argument, and truthfully, Flora found his protective instinct more comforting than constraining. What will you do in town? Ask questions. The hotel clerk, the bartender's someone must know something about a stranger asking after the Nicholsons. He moved around the desk to stand before her. Flora, I need you to promise me something. The intensity in his gaze made her heart skip. What is it? No more facing dangers alone. Whatever comes, we face it together. Promise me. Flora nodded, suddenly unable to look away from his face. I promise. Something shifted in Quentin's expression, a softening, a decision made. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. I thought I'd lost you today, he said quietly. When no one had seen you, when hours passed with no word, I realized something. Flora's breath caught. What did you realize? Instead of answering with words, Quentin lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers, a question more than a kiss. When she didn't pull away, he deepened the contact, drawing her closer with gentle hands. Flora responded with a sense of coming home, of finding something she hadn't known she was seeking. Her arms wound around his neck as the kiss lengthened, neither willing to be the first to break the connection. When they finally parted, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. I realized this stopped being pretend for me some time ago, he admitted softly. For me as well, Flora whispered, her heart so full she could barely speak. Quentin pulled back slightly to see her face. Whatever happens with Harmon, with your father, know that my feelings are real. Unexpected, perhaps, but real. Flora smiled, feeling truly happy for the first time in longer than she could remember. Mine as well, though the timing could be better. A chuckle rumbled in Quentin's chest. Indeed, first we deal with Harmon, then. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear in his eyes. Then they would have time to explore what was growing between them without threats hanging over their heads. True to his word, Quentin rode out at dawn the next morning, leaving Flora in Ellis's protective custody. The older man made no pretense of his assignment, settling himself on the porch with a rifle across his knees and a deck of cards to pass the time. Boss said not to let you out of my sight, he explained simply, and I aim to follow those orders to the letter. Flora brought her mending outside to keep him company, finding his gruff concern rather endearing. Has Quentin told you what's happening? Ellis nodded as he shuffled the cards. Enough to know there's trouble brewing. Said some fellows trying to extort money from you by threatening to tell tales to your kin. That's the essence of it, Flora agreed. My father is not a forgiving man. Ellis dealt himself a hand of solitaire. Most men aren't when their pride's been wounded. But a real father puts his child's welfare above his pride. The simple truth of this statement made Flora's throat tight. You had children, Ellis. A shadow crossed the older man's face. A son. Lost him in the war, same as I lost his mother to fever the year before. Life doesn't always deal you a fair hand, Mrs. Nicholson. But sometimes it gives you a chance to draw new cards. Flora considered his words, understanding the wisdom in them. She'd been dealt a difficult hand with her father, but meeting Quentin had given her a chance at a new life, perhaps even happiness. You love him, don't you? Ellis asked suddenly, his eyes still on his cards. Not just for show, I mean. Flora felt her cheeks warm. Is it that obvious? To an old man who's known love, yes. Ellis arranged his cards methodically. And if you're wondering, he feels the same. Never seen the boss look at anyone the way he looks at you. Before Flora could respond to this unexpected confidence, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Ellis was on his feet in an instant, rifle ready, but relaxed when he recognized the rider. It's the boss, he confirmed, shading his eyes against the midday sun. Back sooner than expected. Quentin dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his expression grim as he strode toward the porch. Flora's heart sank at the sight whatever news he brought couldn't be good. Ellis, saddle 3 horses, Quentin ordered without preamble, and tell Samuel to keep watch on the ranch. We're riding out within the hour. Ellis nodded and headed for the barn without question, leaving Flora alone with Quentin on the porch. What happened? She asked, dreading the answer. What did you learn? Quentin's jaw was tight with barely suppressed anger. Your Mr. Harmon is actually James Harmon Williams Roberts' uncle. He arrived in Pinedale 3 days ago, staying at the hotel under the name Harmon. The barman at the Golden Eagle overheard him asking questions about the Nicholsons after the Shepherd's dinner party. Flora felt the blood drain from her face. Robert's uncle. Then he's not working for my father at all. Not directly, Quentin confirmed. Though he may well intend to claim any reward your father has offered. But first, it seems he plans to extort money from us for his own pocket. What do we do now? Flora asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Quentin took her hands in his. We're leaving for Fort Collins. I have connections there, including a judge who owes me a favor. We'll be married legally, with proper documentation that predates this whole mess. Then we'll return and face Harmon with evidence that you've been Mrs. Nicholson since before the incident with Robert. Flora blinked, struggling to process his words. You want to actually marry me? Now, I want to marry you regardless, Quentin said firmly. This situation just accelerates the timeline. Once we're legally wed, with documents and witnesses that establish our marriage prior to your departure from Wasco, Harmon's leverage disappears. You would have been defending yourself as my wife, not as Joseph Malone's daughter. The logic was sound, but Flora hesitated. Quentin, I don't want you to feel obligated. Marriage is, Flora, he interrupted gently. I'm not proposing out of obligation. I'm proposing because I love you. The timing is admittedly not what I would have chosen, but my feelings are genuine. I believe yours are as well. The simple declaration stole her breath. You love me, Quentin's expression softened. Yes, I think I have since that first day in the general store when you stood your ground against men twice your size. Everything since has only deepened those feelings. Tears pricked Flora's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. But marriage is a serious step, especially under these circumstances. It is, Quentin agreed. If you need time to consider, no, Flora interrupted, suddenly certain. I don't need time. Yes, I'll marry you, today, tomorrow, whenever you wish. The smile that broke across Quentin's face was like sunrise. Without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her a kiss full of promise and certainty. When they parted, he kept her close. We'll ride for Fort Collins immediately. It's 2 days hard travel, but I know the shortest routes. Ellis will accompany us as witness and protection. What about Thursday's meeting with Harmon? We'll be back in time, Quentin assured her. And when we face him, it will be as husband and wife in truth, with documentation to prove it. 2 hours later, the small party set out from North Star, traveling light but well armed. Ellis led the way, his cavalry experience evident in the way he scouted their path and chose defensible camping spots for the night. They pushed hard, stopping only when necessary for the horses' sake. Flora, accustomed to riding but not to such a punishing pace, found muscles aching that she hadn't known existed. Yet she made no complaint, understanding the urgency that drove them. The first night, they camped in a sheltered hollow near a small creek. After a simple meal of jerky and biscuits, Ellis took the first watch, pointedly positioning himself far enough from the fire to give Flora and Quentin some privacy. "Are you certain about this?" Flora asked as they sat side by side, watching the flames. "Once it's done, there's no going back." Quentin took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life. When I built North Star, I thought the land and the cattle would be enough, but something was always missing, someone to share it with. Someone who understands the value of what we're building." Flora leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I never thought I'd find this a place where I belong, a person who sees me as I am and values me for it." Quentin pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Get some rest. We have another long day ahead." They reached Fort Collins late the following afternoon, a bustling town considerably larger than Pinesdale, with brick buildings lining the main street and a proper courthouse dominating the town square. Quentin led them directly to a modest but well-maintained hotel, where he requested 2 adjoining rooms. "My fiancée and I wish to be married tomorrow," he explained to the clerk. "Our companion will stand as witness." The clerk, a young man with spectacles perched on his nose, smiled broadly. "Congratulations, sir. Shall I inquire if Reverend Hopkins is available? He often performs ceremonies for travelers." "Thank you, but I've already sent word to Judge Patterson," Quentin replied. "We'll be married at the courthouse at 10 tomorrow morning." Once settled in their rooms, Flora in one, Quentin and Ellis sharing the adjoining space, Quentin outlined the plan. "Judge Patterson is an old friend. He's agreed to backdate our marriage license to 3 weeks ago, with Santa Fe listed as the location. Ellis will sign as witness, along with the judge's clerk." "Won't that be illegal?" Flora asked hesitantly. Quentin's expression was resolute. "Technically, yes. But the judge understands our situation, that you're being persecuted by your father for defending yourself against assault. He's willing to bend the rules to protect you. And if we're discovered, the risk is minimal," Quentin assured her. "The only person who might challenge it is your father, and he would need to prove the documents false. By the time he could mount such a challenge, if he ever did, we'll have been legitimately married for months." The logic was sound, if somewhat ethically questionable. But faced with Harmon's threats and her father's vindictiveness, Flora found herself willing to accept this solution. "Then we proceed as planned," she said with more confidence than she felt. Quentin smiled, a glint of admiration in his eyes. "You are a remarkable woman, Flora Malone. By this time tomorrow, I'll be proud to call you Flora Nicholson in truth." The following morning dawned clear and bright. Flora dressed carefully in the best clothes. She'd packed a blue traveling dress that Madame Perrine had altered for her. She arranged her hair simply but neatly, wishing fleetingly for flowers to adorn it. A knock at her door heralded Ellis, looking uncharacteristically tidy in a clean shirt and his best vest. "Ready, Mrs. Nicholson to be?" he asked with a rare smile. "Boss is waiting in the lobby, nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." Flora laughed, surprised by the image of the usually composed Quentin pacing anxiously. "Is that so? Never seen him like this," Ellis confirmed, offering his arm. "Not even when facing down rustlers last spring." In the hotel lobby, Quentin turned at their approach. The sight of him tall and handsome in his Sunday best, his green eyes warming as they found hers, made Flora's heart skip. This might not be the wedding she'd once dreamed of, but she couldn't imagine a man she'd rather marry. "You look beautiful," Quentin said as she reached him, taking both her hands in his. "And you look very handsome," she replied softly. "Shall we?" The courthouse was only a short walk away. Judge Patterson, a portly man with kind eyes and a walrus mustache, greeted them warmly in his chambers. "Quentin, my boy, and this must be the bride." He took Flora's hand in both of his. "A pleasure to meet you, young lady. Quentin has explained your circumstances, and I'm happy to help." The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Standing before the judge with Quentin's hands holding hers, Flora spoke her vows with a full heart. The words "I do" passed her lips with absolute certainty. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all that was to come. Ellis beamed like a proud father, and even the judge's clerk wiped away a suspicious moisture from her eyes. Afterwards, Judge Patterson presented them with the marriage certificate dated 3 weeks prior and listing Santa Fe, New Mexico Territory, as the location. "This should resolve your immediate difficulties," he said with a wink. "But I've also prepared a second document, a confidential record of today's ceremony, properly dated and witnessed. Keep it safe. Someday, when this trouble is behind you, you might want proof of your actual wedding day." The gesture touched Flora deeply. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything." "My pleasure, Mrs. Nicholson." The judge patted her hand. "Now, I believe your husband mentioned something about a celebratory luncheon before you begin your journey home." The meal at the town's finest restaurant was a joyful affair, despite the circumstances that had brought them to Fort Collins. Quentin and Flora sat close together, their new status as actual husband and wife lending a different quality to their touches and glances. "How does it feel to be married in truth?" Quentin asked quietly as Ellis regaled the waiter with a sanitized version of how the couple had met. Flora considered the question. "Strangely familiar, yet entirely new," she replied honestly. "We've been playing these roles for weeks, but now—" She looked down at the simple gold band Quentin had somehow procured for her in the short time they'd been in town. "Now it's real." "It always was for me," Quentin said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "From that first night when you accepted my offer to come to North Star, I think some part of me knew you were meant to be there to be with me." Flora felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the wine in her glass. "For me as well. I just didn't recognize it until recently." Their journey back to North Star was marked by a new ease between them. Though still vigilant against possible pursuit, they traveled with lighter hearts. Each night's camp brought them closer to home and to the confrontation with Harmon that would determine their future. They reached North Star late on Wednesday evening, with just hours to spare before the meeting Harmon had demanded. The ranch hands, clearly relieved at their return, greeted them with curious glances but no questions. "Get some rest," Quentin advised Flora as they prepared for bed in separate rooms, despite their new status as propriety demanded with the hands nearby. "Tomorrow will test us both." "Are you certain your plan will work?" Flora asked, unable to keep the worry from her voice. Quentin's expression was determined. "Harmon is counting on your fear and isolation. He doesn't know you have support now or that we've legally established our marriage predating the incident with Robert. When faced with that evidence, his leverage disappears. And if he doesn't accept it? If he still goes to my father? Then we deal with that problem when it comes," Quentin said simply. "Together." The next morning dawned gray and threatening, with heavy clouds promising rain by afternoon. Flora dressed with care in the emerald green dress from the shepherd's dinner, wanting to project confidence for the confrontation ahead. Quentin, too, chose formal attire, a clear signal to Harmon that they were taking this meeting seriously. As they rode toward Pinesdale, Flora fingered the marriage certificate tucked securely in her reticule. "Remember," Quentin said as they approached the town, "let me do most of the talking. Harmon needs to understand that threatening you means dealing with me." The Pinesdale Hotel looked even shabbier in the flat gray light of the overcast day. Ellis remained outside with the horses, positioned to observe anyone entering or leaving, while Quentin and Flora proceeded to the same private parlor where she had met Harmon before. He was already waiting, his smug expression faltering slightly at the sight of Quentin accompanying Flora. "Mrs. Nicholson," Harmon greeted her with mock politeness. "And Mr. Nicholson, I presume. How convenient that you could join us." "Mr. Williams," Quentin replied coolly, using Harmon's real surname. "Yes, I thought it important to meet the man attempting to blackmail my wife." The use of his actual name caught Harmon off guard. "You've been busy, I see." "Indeed." Quentin remained standing, his tall frame imposing in the small room. "We know who you are, James. We know your connection to Robert Williams. And we know you're acting independently of Joseph Malone, hoping to collect a reward only after you've extorted money from us first." Harmon's confident demeanor slipped further. "Clever detective work, Mr. Nicholson, but it changes nothing. I still hold information that would be very damaging to your wife." He infused the last word with doubt about that. Quentin nodded to Flora, who removed the marriage certificate from her reticule and placed it on the table between them. "Our marriage certificate," she explained as Harmon leaned forward to examine it. "As you can see, Quentin and I were legally married in Santa Fe 3 weeks before the incident with your nephew. I was already Mrs. Nicholson when Robert attacked me in my father's barn." Harmon studied the document, his brow furrowing as he noted the date and location. "This could be forged," he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. "It's not," Quentin stated firmly. "Judge Patterson of Fort Collins officiated. His signature, along with those of 2 witnesses, is clearly visible. The certificate has been properly filed with territorial authorities. We also have sworn statements from the Shepherds and several other respectable citizens who have met us as husband and wife," Flora added, though this was a slight embellishment of the truth. "If you go to my father with your story now, you'll merely be revealing that I defended myself while visiting his ranch as Mrs. Nicholson." Harmon's face had reddened during this exchange. "You expect me to believe this convenient tale, that you were already married when you shot Robert?" "Whether you believe it or not is immaterial," Quentin replied evenly. "The legal documentation exists. If you persist in your extortion attempt or go to Joseph Malone with false claims, we will press charges against you for attempted blackmail." "Your word against mine," Harmon blustered, though his confidence was clearly shaken. A ranch owner and his wife with documented evidence against a known associate of a man who attempted assault. Quentin raised an eyebrow. "I like our chances with a jury, Mr. Williams." A tense silence filled the room as Harmon considered his options. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. $500 would have been simpler for everyone, he muttered. "Perhaps," Quentin agreed, "but we prefer honesty to extortion." He placed a hand on Flora's shoulder, a gesture of support and unity. "Now, I suggest you leave this territory, Mr. Williams. If we see you again, or hear that you've approached Joseph Malone with any version of these events, we will take legal action immediately." Harmon glared at them both but seemed to recognize the futility of further argument. "You haven't heard the last of this matter," he warned as he rose. "Joseph Malone isn't a man who forgives easily." "Neither am I," Quentin replied softly. "Remember that." After Harmon had stormed out, Flora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Do you think he'll go to my father anyway?" Quentin considered this. "Possibly. But without proof, and with our marriage certificate establishing a different timeline, your father would have little recourse. The law would view you as my wife defending herself, not his daughter. And if my father comes himself—" The possibility had haunted Flora since Harmon's first appearance. Quentin took both her hands in his. "Then we face him together, with the truth of our marriage to protect you. I won't let him hurt you again, Flora. That's a promise." The ride back to North Star was silent, both of them processing the confrontation and its potential aftermath. Rain began to fall as they approached the ranch, a gentle shower that seemed to wash away some of the tension of the past days. That evening, after supper with the hands, Quentin surprised Flora by asking Ellis to gather everyone in the main room of the house. Once all were assembled, Ellis, the Harding brothers, and Samuel Quentin cleared his throat. "I owe you men an explanation," he began, standing with Flora at his side. "You've been loyal and discreet, even when circumstances must have seemed unusual." The hands exchanged glances but remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "The truth is, Flora and I were only recently married 4 days ago in Fort Collins, not weeks ago in Santa Fe." Quentin's honesty surprised Flora, though she understood his need to come clean with the men who'd stood by them. The situation was complicated by threats from someone connected to Flora's past. "We needed to establish our marriage as predating certain events to protect her from false accusations." Ellis nodded slowly. "Figured it was something like that, boss. The way you two danced around each other at first, not like any newlyweds I've ever seen." "And now," Quentin asked, looking at each man in turn, "now you know the truth. Flora is my wife, legally and in my heart. Anyone who threatens her, threatens me. I need to know if that changes anything for any of you." Samuel spoke first, his normally quiet voice firm. "Mrs. Nicholson has brought life back to this ranch, boss. Made it a home instead of just a place to work. Far as I'm concerned, when you marry doesn't matter a whit." The others nodded in agreement, their loyalty unshaken by the revelation. Flora felt tears prick her eyes at their acceptance. "Thank you," she said simply. "All of you." After the hands had departed for the bunkhouse, Quentin turned to Flora. "There's one more thing we need to address," he said, taking her hand. "I believe it's time for you to properly move into the main bedroom as my wife in every sense." Flora felt color rise in her cheeks. Despite their legal marriage, they had maintained separate sleeping arrangements since returning to North Star. "Are you certain, after everything that's happened?" Quentin's gaze was tender as he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm certain that I love you. That I want to build a life with you, a real marriage, not just one on paper, but only if you're ready." Flora's heart swelled with emotion. This man who had risked so much for her safety and happiness was still putting her comfort first. "I am ready," she whispered. "I want to be your wife in every way." His kiss was gentle at first, then deepening with a passion that had been held in check for too long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "Let me show you to our room, Mrs. Nicholson," he said softly, a smile in his voice. Much later, as they lay entwined beneath the quilts, the rain pattering steadily on the roof, Flora marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From her father's harsh judgment to the safety of Quentin's arms, a path fraught with danger but leading ultimately to joy. "What are you thinking?" Quentin murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes good things come from terrible beginnings," she replied, nestling closer to his warmth. "If my father hadn't called me a disgrace and cast me out, I might never have found you." Quentin's arms tightened around her. "Your father was wrong about you, Flora. You are the most courageous, compassionate woman I've ever known. His loss is my immeasurable gain." The following weeks brought a new rhythm to life at the North Star Ranch. Flora and Quentin settled into true married life, their pretense transformed into genuine partnership. The hands treated Flora with a combination of respect and protective fondness that touched her deeply. True to Quentin's prediction, no word came from Joseph Malone. Whether Harmon had approached him and been rebuffed, or had simply abandoned his scheme, they couldn't know. But as summer turned to fall and then to winter, the threat seemed to recede. Flora wrote to Rebecca Shepherd, explaining their hasty departure after the dinner party and extending an invitation to visit North Star. The Shepherds accepted eagerly, becoming frequent guests and close friends. Through them, Flora and Quentin gradually integrated into the social circles of the territory, their unusual beginning forgotten as they established themselves as a devoted couple. The Christmas season brought snow to the ranch, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Flora decorated the house with pine boughs and red ribbons, baked gingerbread, and prepared special gifts for each of the hands. On Christmas Eve, as they sat before the fire after a festive dinner with the entire ranch household, Quentin presented Flora with a small package wrapped in silver paper. "What's this?" she asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it and see," Quentin replied, a curious mixture of nervousness and anticipation in his expression. Inside the package was a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When Flora opened it, she found a tiny slip of paper folded inside rather than the expected miniature portrait. "Read it," Quentin encouraged when she looked at him questioningly. Flora unfolded the paper, squinting to make out the small handwriting in the firelight. As she read, her free hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Quentin," she whispered, "is this? Are you certain?" His smile was radiant. "Dr. Peterson confirmed it yesterday when you went for your headaches. You're with child, Flora. We're going to have a baby in the summer." Joy unlike anything Flora had ever known washed over her. She threw her arms around Quentin's neck, laughing and crying at once. "A baby, our baby." Quentin held her close, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I can't imagine a better Christmas gift." "You've made me happier than I ever thought possible." Flora Nicholson. As they sat together before the fire, making plans for the nursery and debating names, Flora reflected on how completely her life had transformed in less than a year. From disgrace to beloved wife, from isolation to family, a journey she could never have imagined when she fled her father's ranch that fateful morning. "I love you, Quentin," she said softly, leaning against his solid strength. "Thank you for calling me your wife that day, even when it wasn't true." "It became true," he replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "And it's been the best decision of my life." Outside, snow continued to fall gently, blanketing North Star Ranch in peaceful white. Inside, warmth and love filled every corner of the home they had built together, a home that would soon welcome new life, continuing the story that began with a desperate young woman, a compassionate stranger, and words that changed everything. "This lady is my wife." On a bright summer day in 1876, as the afternoon sun cast golden light across the rolling plains surrounding North Star Ranch, Flora Nicholson brought her daughter into the world after 18 hours of labor. Quentin, who had paced the hallway throughout the ordeal, rushed to her side when Dr. Peterson finally allowed him entry. "She's perfect," Flora whispered, cradling the tiny bundle with wisps of dark hair and her father's green eyes. "Come meet your daughter." Quentin's hands trembled slightly as he took the infant, awe and love transforming his features. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "I'm your father." They named her Hope Elizabeth Nicholson, hope for the future they had built against all odds, and Elizabeth after Quentin's mother. The hands celebrated with a bonfire and feast that evening, Ellis proudly accepting the honorary title of grandfather. The Shepherds and other neighbors sent gifts and well wishes, the community embracing this newest addition to the Nicholson family. As autumn approached, bringing with it Hope's first smile and Quentin's most successful cattle drive to date, Flora received an unexpected letter. The return address made her heart stutter: Wasco, Texas. She opened it with trembling fingers while Hope napped nearby. The letter was brief, written in a hand Flora hadn't seen in years. "My dearest Flora, word has reached me of your marriage and the birth of your daughter. While your father remains unforgiving, I could not bear to let this occasion pass without reaching out to the daughter I wronged by leaving. I have thought of you every day since I departed. Fear of your father's retribution kept me silent all these years, but now that you have found happiness far from his influence, I hope we might reconnect. I am remarried now, living in Denver. If you should ever wish to write or visit, my address is enclosed. With deepest love and regret, your mother. Alina. Tears blurred Flora's vision as she read and reread the letter. Her mother alive, remarried, and reaching out after all these years. The emotions that surged through her were complex. Anger at the abandonment, relief that her mother was well, curiosity about the woman she had become. When Quentin returned from the fields that evening, Flora shared the letter with him, her voice unsteady as she explained the history of her mother's departure. "What do you want to do?" he asked after reading it carefully. Flora looked at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "I want to write back," she decided. "Not for my sake, but for Hope's. She deserves to know her grandmother, even if the relationship begins cautiously." Quentin nodded, pride evident in his gaze. "Your capacity for forgiveness continues to amaze me. Most people in your position would hold onto bitterness." "Life is too precious to waste on bitterness," Flora replied, thinking of all she might have missed had she allowed her father's cruelty to harden her heart. "Besides, Hope has taught me that love multiplies when shared. There's room in our lives for more family." The correspondence with Alina developed slowly but steadily over the following months. Flora learned that her mother had fled to escape Joseph's increasingly controlling and volatile behavior, a decision made in desperation, but regretted for the daughter left behind. "She tried to take me," Flora told Quentin one evening after receiving a particularly revealing letter. "But my father caught her packing my things and threatened to have her arrested for kidnapping. She believed she could better help me from a distance, establishing herself and then returning for me legally." "But she never did," Quentin observed gently. Flora sighed. "No. By the time she was settled with her new husband, my father had spread such vicious rumors about her abandonment that she feared any court would side with him. She wrote letters, apparently dozens of them, but my father must have intercepted them all." The revelations brought a measure of peace to Flora's heart, closing wounds she had carried since childhood. When Alina tentatively suggested a visit to meet her granddaughter, Flora and Quentin agreed, inviting her to stay at North Star for Christmas. The reunion was tearful but healing. Alina, now in her 40s with silver threading her once honey-brown hair, embraced her daughter with trembling arms. "Can you ever forgive me?" she whispered. "I already have," Flora replied, meaning it completely. Alina's husband, George, proved to be a kind, steady man who treated Alina with gentle respect, the opposite of Joseph Malone in every way. Hope took to her grandmother immediately, reaching for Alina with chubby hands and infectious giggles. Watching her mother cradle her daughter before the Christmas fire, Flora felt a circle closing, wounds healing, new connections forming, the future bright with possibility. "Are you happy?" Quentin asked quietly, standing beside her as they observed the scene. Flora leaned against him, his arm automatically encircling her waist. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "I have everything I never dared to dream of: a husband who loves me, a beautiful daughter, a home filled with laughter, and now my mother returned to me. What more could I want?" Quentin's expression grew thoughtful. "Perhaps a son to complement our daughter," he suggested, a twinkle in his green eyes. "North Star will need strong hands to carry it forward." Flora laughed, joy bubbling through her. "Are you suggesting we expand our family, Mr. Nicholson?" "I'm suggesting that Hope might enjoy having a sibling," Quentin replied, pulling her closer. "And that I would enjoy practicing the making of one." Their laughter drew curious glances from Alina and George, but Flora merely shook her head. saving the conversation for later for the privacy of their bedroom, where so many of their most important discussions had taken place over the past year. That night, as snow fell gently outside their window and Hope slept soundly in her nursery, Flora and Quentin indeed practiced with enthusiasm. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, Flora marveled yet again at the journey that had brought her here. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" she asked, her head resting on Quentin's chest. "If you hadn't been in that store when my father's men found me, if you hadn't claimed me as your wife." Quentin's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Sometimes. But then I remind myself that what matters is what did happen, not what might have been." "My father called me a disgrace," Flora murmured, "and you called me your wife." "The best impulsive decision I ever made," Quentin replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Though I must confess, it wasn't entirely impulsive. There was something about you from that first moment, a courage, a light that drew me. I couldn't bear to see it extinguished." Flora propped herself up on one elbow to look into his face. "I never properly thanked you for that day. For taking such a risk for a stranger." Quentin smiled, reaching up to trace the curve of her cheek. "You've thanked me every day since, with your strength, your love, your partnership in building this life together. You're extraordinary, Flora Nicholson, and I'm grateful every day that fate brought you into that store at precisely the right moment." "As am I," Flora whispered, leaning down to kiss him. "As am I." Spring arrived at North Star with new calves in the pastures, and the news that Flora was indeed expecting their second child. Hope, now nearly walking and babbling constantly, seemed to sense the excitement, patting her mother's still flat stomach with curious hands. Ellis, gruffer than ever but with a softness in his eyes whenever Hope toddled toward him, declared he'd have to postpone his retirement plans. "Can't leave now," he told Quentin. "Not with another little Nicholson on the way. Someone's got to teach these children how to ride proper." The years that followed brought both joys and challenges to the Nicholson family. A son, James Quentin, arrived the following winter, a robust boy with his mother's honey-brown hair and his father's determined nature. 2 years later, twins Emma and Eliza completed their family, bringing the total to 4 children under 6 years, a lively household that kept Flora busy from dawn to dusk. North Star Ranch prospered under Quentin and Flora's joint management. Flora's skill with accounts and organization complemented Quentin's expertise with cattle and land. Together, they expanded their holdings, built a larger main house to accommodate their growing family, and established North Star as one of the territory's most successful operations. Alina and George visited regularly, eventually purchasing a small home in Pinesdale to be closer to their grandchildren. The relationship between mother and daughter deepened with time, healing old hurts and creating new memories. Word from Wasco came occasionally through travelers or business connections. Joseph Malone had never remarried, growing increasingly bitter and isolated as the years passed. His ranch, once prosperous, began to decline as his health failed, and his harsh management drove away capable hands. In the summer of 1885, nearly 10 years after Flora had fled Wasco with nothing but a horse and a small bag of possessions, a letter arrived bearing the Malone Ranch stamp. Flora opened it with a sense of detachment, curious, but no longer vulnerable to her father's power. The letter was not from Joseph himself, but from his lawyer, informing Flora that her father had suffered a severe stroke and was not expected to recover. As his only living relative, her presence was requested to make arrangements for his care and the disposition of his property. That evening, after the children were asleep, Flora and Quentin discussed the unexpected summons on the wide porch of their home, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. "You don't have to go," Quentin said, his hand covering hers on the arm of her rocking chair. "No one would blame you for refusing." Flora considered his words, weighing the past against the present. "I think I do need to go," she said finally. "Not for him, he forfeited any claim to my loyalty long ago, but for myself, to close that chapter completely." Quentin nodded, understanding as always. "Then I'll come with you. We'll bring the children, make it part of a longer journey. They should see more of the country anyway." The decision made, they prepared for the journey back to Wasco, a place Flora had never expected to see again. Ellis, now semi-retired but still very much part of the family, agreed to oversee the ranch in their absence with the capable assistance of Samuel, who had risen to foreman over the years. The journey to Wasco took nearly 2 weeks by train and stagecoach. Hope, now 9, kept her younger siblings entertained with stories and games, while James, at 7, asked endless questions about the changing landscape. The twins, 5 years old and identical except for their personalities, alternated between excitement at the adventure and homesickness for North Star. As they approached Wasco, Flora felt a strange detachment, as if returning to a place from a half-forgotten dream. The town had grown somewhat but remained recognizably the same, the main street dusty and lined with familiar buildings, the church steeple still the tallest structure visible from a distance. They took rooms at the hotel rather than staying at the Malone Ranch. The lawyer, Mr. Hendricks, called upon them that evening, expressing surprise at seeing Flora accompanied by a husband and 4 children. "Your father spoke of you as unmarried," he explained awkwardly. "I had no idea you had established such a substantial family." "My father and I have had no contact for nearly a decade," Flora replied evenly. "How is his condition?" Hendricks sighed. "Poor, I'm afraid. The stroke has left him unable to speak and partially paralyzed. The doctor gives him perhaps a month at most. He's being cared for at the ranch by a hired nurse, but it's a difficult situation. I'll visit him tomorrow," Flora decided. "Alone first, then perhaps with my family if it seems appropriate." That night, as they prepared for bed in their hotel room, Quentin watched Flora with concern. "Are you certain about this? Seeing him again after all this time in such circumstances?" Flora paused in brushing her hair, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "I'm certain. I need to face him one last time, not as the frightened girl who fled, but as the woman I've become. The woman you helped me become." The following morning, Flora rode alone to the Malone Ranch, memories flooding back with each familiar landmark. The property looked neglected, fences in need of repair, outbuildings weathered and sagging, fields less productive than she remembered. The house itself seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than in her memories. The housekeeper who answered her knock was unfamiliar, a tired-looking woman who led Flora to her father's bedroom without comment. Joseph Malone lay propped against pillows, his once powerful frame wasted by illness, his right side visibly weaker than his left. His eyes, however, retained their sharpness, widening in recognition as Flora entered the room. "Hello, Father," she said calmly, taking the chair beside his bed. He couldn't speak, but his expression spoke volumes: surprise, confusion, and something else Flora couldn't quite identify. Perhaps regret, though that seemed too generous an interpretation. "I received word of your condition," she continued. "I've come to ensure your affairs are in order and that you're receiving proper care." Joseph's left hand moved weakly, gesturing toward a writing slate on the bedside table. Flora handed it to him, watching as he laboriously scrawled a single word with chalk. "Alone?" "No," Flora replied. "My husband and our 4 children came with me. They're at the hotel in town." Surprise again in those familiar stern eyes. Her father wrote again. "Married, for nearly 10 years now, to Quentin Nicholson, a rancher from the Cimarron Territory." We have a successful operation larger than this one now, I believe. Joseph's expression darkened momentarily before he wrote again. Robert. Flora stiffened at the name she hadn't heard in years. What about him? Here, works for me. The revelation was unexpected. Robert Williams still works for you. After all this time, Joseph nodded weakly, then wrote, Foreman now. Flora absorbed this information, wondering if Robert knew of her return to Wasco. I see. Well, that needn't concern me. My business here is to ensure you have what you need, not to revisit the past. For the next hour, Flora discussed practical matters with her father, his care, the state of the ranch, his wishes regarding his property. Through laborious written exchanges, she learned that the ranch had declined significantly in recent years, burdened by debt and mismanagement. You have options, she told him plainly. The property could be sold to cover your debts, with any remainder set aside for your care. Or I could arrange for temporary management until a more permanent solution is needed. Joseph wrote a single word. You? Flora shook her head. No, father. My life is at North Star now with my family. I won't uproot them to salvage what you've let deteriorate through stubbornness and poor decisions. Something like respect flickered in Joseph's eyes at her directness. He wrote again, his hand trembling with effort. Bring them. Want to see. The request surprised Flora. You want to meet my family? Why? Joseph's answer was slow in coming, each letter formed with visible strain. Before I die. Flora considered refusing. This man had cast her out, called her a disgrace, chosen to believe the worst of her. He had no right to meet her children, to see the happiness she had built without him, and yet, there was something in his expression, a vulnerability she had never witnessed before, a loneliness that spoke to some still tender part of her heart. I'll discuss it with my husband, she said finally. If he agrees, we'll visit tomorrow. Relief visibly washed over Joseph's features. He wrote one last message before fatigue overcame him. Thank you. Those two simple words, perhaps the first expression of gratitude Flora had ever received from her father, followed her as she rode back to town, turning over in her mind like strange coins from a foreign land. Quentin listened carefully to her account of the visit, his expression thoughtful. What do you want to do? He asked when she had finished. Not what you feel obligated to do, but what you truly want. Flora looked at their children, playing a board game in the corner of the hotel suite. I want them to see where I came from, she said slowly. Not to meet a grandfather who might have loved them in some alternate life, but to understand my journey more completely. And perhaps I want him to see what he missed the family that could have included him had he made different choices. Quentin nodded, understanding as always. Then we'll go together, all of us. The following day they arrived at the Malone Ranch in the family wagon Quentin had arranged to borrow. Flora had prepared the children as best she could, explaining that their grandfather was very ill and could not speak, and that he had not been part of her life for many years. But why, Mama? Hope had asked, her perceptive green eyes troubled. Why would he not want to know you? Sometimes people make mistakes they can't undo, Flora had answered carefully. Your grandfather made such a mistake with me, but that doesn't mean we can't show him kindness now. Joseph was sitting up when they entered, clearly having made an effort with his appearance despite his weakness. His eyes moved from Flora to Quentin, tall and imposing beside her, and then to the children, lingering on each face as if memorizing their features. Father, this is my husband, Quentin Nicholson. Flora began the introductions. And these are our children, Hope, James, and the twins, Emma and Eliza. Quentin stepped forward, extending his hand. Mr. Malone. After a moment's hesitation, Joseph raised his left hand to shake Quentin's, his grip weak but determined. He gestured toward his slate, and Flora held it for him as he wrote, Fine family. Thank you, Quentin replied, his tone respectful but reserved. "We're very blessed." The children, initially shy, gradually relaxed as the visit continued. Hope, always the most outgoing, showed her grandfather a book she was reading. James described life on the North Star Ranch with a 7-year-old's enthusiasm for horses and cattle. The twins remained quieter, but eventually shared the dolls they had brought for the journey. Throughout it all, Joseph watched with an expression Flora had never seen on his face before, something close to wonder, tinged with unmistakable regret. When the children's attention drifted to exploring the unfamiliar room, Joseph wrote a message meant for Flora alone. "Should have believed you." The admission, the closest thing to an apology she was likely to receive, caught Flora by surprise. She had come expecting nothing, prepared for continued bitterness or, at best, indifference. Instead, she found this fragment of remorse, offered too late but sincerely. "Yes," she agreed quietly. "You should have, but we can't change the past." Joseph wrote again. "Happy now?" Flora looked at Quentin, who was patiently answering James's questions about an antique rifle mounted on the wall, then at her daughters, their heads bent together over their dolls. "Very happy," she said, meaning it completely. "Quentin is a good man, the best I've ever known, and our children are my greatest joy." Something like peace settled over Joseph's features. He wrote slowly, "Glad, deserved better than me." The visit lasted another hour before the children grew restless and Joseph's strength began to wane. As they prepared to leave, he gestured for Flora to stay behind for a moment. When they were alone, he wrote one final message. "Ranch yours. Papers with Hendricks." Flora stared at the words in disbelief. "You're leaving the ranch to me, after everything?" Joseph nodded weakly, then added, "Only right, built it for you, before I changed." The admission that the ranch had originally been meant as her inheritance, before bitterness had poisoned his intentions, brought unexpected tears to Flora's eyes. "I don't know what to say." Joseph's expression was resigned as he wrote, "Nothing to say. Too late for words." Flora touched his hand briefly. This man, who had been both her tormentor and, in a different life, might have been her protector. "Not too late for peace between us," she said softly. "I forgive you, Father, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry anger into the future." Relief and gratitude washed over Joseph's features. His eyes closed briefly, as if a great weight had been lifted from him. When he opened them again, there was a calmness there that Flora had never seen before. She left him then, joining her family outside. As they drove away from the Malone ranch, Quentin asked gently, "Are you all right?" Flora watched the house recede in the distance, the place that had once been her prison and was now, ironically, her inheritance. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. "I'm at peace." Joseph Malone died 3 weeks later, with Flora at his bedside. He never regained his speech, but in those final days, a fragile understanding developed between father and daughter, not erasing the past, but acknowledging it and moving beyond. After the simple funeral, attended mainly by townspeople who had known Joseph in better days, Flora and Quentin faced the question of the Malone ranch. "We could sell it," Quentin suggested as they walked the property one evening. "Use the proceeds to expand North Star or set aside funds for the children's education." Flora considered this, looking out over the land she had once expected to inherit, then fled from in desperation. "Or we could rebuild it," she said slowly. "Not to live here ourselves, North Star is our home. But perhaps to create something new from what was broken." Over the following year, Flora and Quentin transformed the Malone Ranch, paying off its debts and installing a capable manager. They converted part of the property into a training facility for young women seeking independence, teaching ranching skills, household management, and basic business principles. "A place where women with nowhere else to go can learn to stand on their own," Flora explained to Rebecca Shepherd, who had enthusiastically joined the project. The kind of place I wish had existed when I needed it. They named it Hope House, after their daughter, but also for what it represented: a new beginning for women who, like Flora once had, needed a chance to rewrite their stories. On the 5th anniversary of Joseph's death, Flora stood on the porch of the transformed Malone Ranch, watching young women tend gardens, manage livestock, and learn the skills that would secure their independence. Beside her, Quentin wrapped an arm around her waist. "Your father would hardly recognize the place," he observed, surveying the thriving operation that had replaced the declining ranch. "No," Flora agreed, "but I like to think he would approve in the end. This is what the land was always meant for: creating something that grows and nurtures, not something that confines." Quentin pressed a kiss to her temple. "You've transformed his legacy, just as you transformed the legacy he tried to impose on you. You took disgrace and turned it into dignity for yourself and now for others." Flora leaned into his embrace, gratitude filling her heart. "With your help," she reminded him. "When my father called me a disgrace, you called me your wife. That changed everything." "No," Quentin corrected gently. "You changed everything. I just had the good sense to recognize an extraordinary woman when I met her." As the sun set over the Texas plains, painting the sky in brilliant golds and purples, Flora thought of the frightened young woman who had fled this very spot a lifetime ago. How impossible it would have seemed then to imagine returning in triumph rather than shame, with a loving husband at her side and 4 beautiful children waiting at home. "We should head back," Quentin suggested as darkness began to fall. "The children will be waiting for their bedtime stories." Flora nodded, taking his hand as they walked toward their waiting horses. "I'm thinking of writing my own story someday," she said thoughtfully. "Not just for our children, but for the women at Hope House, to show them that even the darkest beginnings can lead to light." "I think that's a wonderful idea," Quentin replied. "Though I hope you'll give me a flattering portrayal." Flora laughed, the sound carrying across the peaceful land. "Oh, I don't think that will be difficult. After all, you're the hero of the story, the man who saw value in a woman when everyone else saw disgrace." "No," Quentin corrected her gently. "I'm just the fortunate man who recognized the hero of her own story and was blessed enough to become part of it." As they rode toward home toward North Star and their waiting children, Flora felt a sense of completion. The circle that had begun with rejection and flight had transformed into one of acceptance and homecoming. The words that had once wounded her, "You're a disgrace to the Malone name," had lost their power, replaced by the truth she had discovered in Quentin's love and in her own strength. That her worth had never depended on her father's approval, only on her own courage to forge a new path when the old one proved unbearable. And in that courage, she had found not just survival, but triumph, a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined on that fateful day when her father called her a disgrace, and the cowboy said, "Then I'll call you my wife."